So you can plug it directly on the computer and use a camera or use anything next in your computer. So what I do with this is, if I'm doing something like, let's say, this material, this plastic material, I try to look at references first. That's kind of like my first, point of contact with a project, let's say, and then I use that microscope to, figure out those intricacies of the material. Even the simplest material, like you just take I don't know, like a metal or a plastic or something like this. This is just a little pillow from my chair, right? It's just a black leather. But if you just get really, really close, you see all the perforated leather, all the patterns, all of that. So when you use something like and the details, and try to recreate all of those small pieces, very rich texture. So that's kind of like the first thing I do. All right. I'm going to walk you through these ones really quickly. And by the way, just feel free to interrupt me as well. Like, I'm just, walking you through this, but there is no, there's nothing necessarily planned in terms of what I'm going to show you. I can just show you whatever you guys want. So feel free to interrupt me. So you see, this is kind of like what I covered in that first video. So I have a simple base. And even with one single layer, it already looks a little bit interesting just because it has that subsurface scattering effect. So it is not just a plain, white texture. But if I go ahead and start enabling all of these, you see this is the thickness layer that is telling me, if I go into Shift and click on the layer, sorry, Alt, not Shift. This is basically the layer of the thickness. So in those areas that are closer to the white color or lighter gray, that's when the plastic is going to be thinner. So you can control all of that with levels, right? But the idea with this is that you have a slightly different effect of the scattering. You see, this layer is the one that is adding extra scattering in that area, and it's making it look like more transparent, translucent, and kind of like creamy in a way. And then you have the ambient occlusion just to adjust a little bit of the colors. This is the cloud colors. It's kind of like the first layer that variates the design, or variates the, sorry, not the design, variates the color. Then you have a little bit of dirt. I'm working at 4K, so just every time that I enable something, it might take a little while to change. But all of these layers are really just to, looking at that very close-up reference of the microscope. If I just get really close, right? So this is probably what I would see in the, let's say, in an image that I take, or using that microscope to see the close-up. And I try to recreate similar patterns that I see in a very small portion. So like these little spots, very subtle thing, but you can see it does make a difference. It does change things around. Then I can add the veins, again, very subtle. And of course, you have control over the, the opacity and all of that good stuff to, tweak that. All right. So the roughness details are basically this. So now that I rotate things around, you see this variation in the roughness as well. The cavity dirt, you won't see it unless you are in somewhere that is controlled by the cavity of the mesh maps that is baked. So you see this one is slightly different. So something like the cavity dirt, if I go into the mask, as you can see, it is using the generator to create this cavity. And these cavities are created based on the mesh maps. So if I scroll down, if I select the mask actually, if I scroll down, you see that it is using the world space normal, the position gradient, the thickness, and the curvature, and the ambient occlusion. The curvature is the kind of like the most important one for this, because it is kind of like controlling where those crevices or edges are, and that's what is creating this mask. So this is just to say that obviously if you're working on a different project that is not matte, you need to create your bakes, and you need to create a really good kind of like baked maps to generate these accurately. But with Matte 3, you have the file, so all of these maps are already baked, and you can just drag and drop them, like I show you in the video as well on how to set up this project. But anyway, that's what I'm kind of like covering here. Like the dirt map, or this edges dirtiness, is based on that cavity. All right, so I'm just gonna go over to the entire plastic, And there you go. So it's a single folder that you can turn into a smart material. I also cover how to do that. But you see, it's just a bunch of very subtle layers, very slight difference in the roughness, the color, a little bit of bump, and that's what creates that effect. Then I have this entire folder, which is the one that adds the color, right? All these patterns. And then I have another version of this plastic, this, I would say it's just a duplicate, but I overlaid it on top. And this is just to enhance a little bit of those translucency details. Again, it's very subtle, but you kind of like see the difference, especially around the inside area here. If you look at this section right here. Other than that, I just have a bit more kind of like dust and dirt layers, as you can see here at the bottom. The join, this is an interesting one. I also cover how to do that in future lessons, but it's basically this kind of like join area of the plastic. So if you imagine matte being kind of like a vinyl toy that is not necessarily manufactured in the best of quality, that's kind of like what I wanted to create on this one. That is it's a cool vinyl toy, but it's it's put together based on two molds. So you have the two halves, and then you just put it together and glue them together, or kind of like melt this section here. So you have that line going through the middle as well, and that's the same thing for the body. So that's the line that you can see in there, and that's what I have in here in a single layer. And that is done again very simply with a fill layer. It has a few filters, which I also cover how to create, but it's basically one thing that's just add a tiny little detail. Is not the most obvious thing, but again, it all helps to create that effect of what you're going for. So it's really important to sort of like think about those very small details. Other than that, what I have here, and it's a pretty cool kind of like effect, but also workflow, is the HSL perceptive. So if I turn this on, you'll see there's a tiny change, especially on the yellows. Let's have a look here, somewhere here. If I turn this on and off. Yeah, so it saturates and darkens those red and yellow colors a little bit more. That is basically this one. Actually, if you filter by the filters, is this one right here. So I just drag and dropped it in here, and that's what sits on top of every single layer, and it's just to variate the color slightly or adjust it. And I treat this one kind of like my, hue saturation values or color balance, although there's a color balance here as well, or color correct, like you would have it in Photoshop. This is something that I would do at the very end. As you can see, I have it just at the end of the layer stack. So once I've done all the design and all of that, but just wanted to cover it. And then I have this one just for fun. Probably won't use it, but it is another interesting filter that basically turns anything that you have below the filter, and it makes it kind of like these brushy strokes, like oil painting. And it has like that sort of canvas texture and a little bit of, hide information as well. So it just makes it more like, painterly like, which I think is pretty cool. Again, it might not be, or it's not what I would go for this specific sort of vinyl vibe that I want to create, but, it's something there that if you want to explore is pretty cool. But yeah, that is pretty much it. I'm going to turn this on and off. The other thing that I would say is really cool, let me just turn this one on, is this icon right here. So this is the instance properties, right? Or this basically tells me that this layer is instanced. So what that means is that I can change something on this specific layer, and it will change in different texture sets. So in case you're not like super familiar with how Painter works, if I go to the texture set list, you have 3 format for this character, and that basically means that they're different objects in a way, or different materials. So basically the head is on its own. You can hold the Alt and Q just to isolate just the head. If you select the body, you can do the same thing, isolate that. So basically we have 3 different objects within this project, right? So that also means that if I have the body selected, the layers that I have here are going to be different than the layer stack or the designs and everything that I use for the head, right? So if I go back to the head, by the way, you can select different texture sets within the viewport by holding the Control, the Alt, and the right click. So I just did that to select the head, and you see the layer stack is different. So if you want to maintain consistency across your, in this case, 3 texture sets, what you can do is create instances. So that's what I have here. So anytime that I change something here, let's just do something crazy like this. You see, it just changes through the entire texture set. So I don't remember what I had, but it doesn't matter. Something like this. I'm going to show you how to do that very quickly because I think it's a powerful thing. I would just recommend if you want to use instance layers. So this is probably for another Q&A, actually. But if you want to use instance layers, I would recommend to do them towards the end of your project for this type of tweaks, just because if you have instance layers and then you have a bunch of other layers that you create on top of them, every time that you update that, it's going to take a long time because it needs to process all the layer stack at the top. That's the reason why I only have this kind of like at the top of my layer stack. But I'm going to show you anyway because it's fun. But I would, yeah, just remember to use this at the end. So I'm going to create a new fill layer here. I'm going to drop it at the top. So you see it's currently just affecting the head. And you can see the eyes and the nose that I created for my character because if I select the hide channel, this is set to linear dodge. So if I reset this to normal or to replace, right, either or, it is actually taking the information of the hide map and replacing the entire thing. But yeah, I don't want this. It's going to leave it as it is. So instead, what I want to do is, I don't know, create some additional stuff. I want to make it blue, and I'm going to create a black mask, and I'm going to add a generator, and I'm going to go for, let's try this fiberglass, you know, something random. So now it is kind of like a fiberglass material. I can add a little bit more of wear towards the edges, a bit more contrast, a bit of the grunginess around it. So again, nothing fancy, nothing crazy here for this. I just want to show you how it works, and then I'm going to take this, set it to a lighter tone. Maybe it is too intense actually. So let's reduce the wear and tear. Yeah, something like that. But let's say that I want to now have the same thing in the other, the other parts of the model, so that it's consistent, right? I'm applying the quality of the material across the model. So you can either copy and paste. So you can just click on copy layers, then go to another one and paste as instance. But the easiest thing would be to right click and go to instantiate across texture sets. So if you click on that one, you'll get this pop up, and you can just say, okay, I have it already in the head. That's why it has the source in brackets. So that's my source, but I can instantiate it to the body and the base and click OK. And there we go. So now we have this effect across multiple sets. And I can just go ahead and tweak this, maybe increase the level, and you see it is being increased across all the texture sets, which is pretty cool, right? So, and you see it's not the fastest thing. So if you have this below the layer stack, it's going to take ages to update. Obviously, depending on your computer as well, but it will take ages. So I would recommend only do this type of instantiating towards the end, just to adjust things. Maybe add like a dust layer, or some scratches and that sort of thing. All right, I'm going to delete that one. Alrighty. Cool. So any questions that you guys want to ask at all? Or anything that you'd like me to cover now that we are live? Let me check the chat. I don't know if can you guys can unmute yourself? Maybe you can, but best lighting in Substance Painter. Well. So I think I understand the question. Maybe you're referring to the lighting environment to work with. I do mention that in the video, right? Yeah, the environment. Okay, cool. Because I was gonna say, in terms of lighting, I wouldn't use Painter for lighting. You can get some nice renders using this icon right here, the eye render, and it gives you kind of like a ray tracing, very cool renders. Sometimes it's actually really easy to just click on this icon and get a very good render for work in progress that has like all the effects and everything. So I do use this every now and again, not all the time, but I find it useful. Now, in terms of the environments, so that's what Tiny Gray is asking. So if you go to display, Sorry, not display. Where are we? Yeah, display. Sorry. Sorry, I have the. This is my custom UI, so it might not be the same as what you see. So in the display settings, you have these environment settings. I use this panorama. So if you click on this one, you have a bunch of them, and you can download as well your own. The one that I would recommend is the most neutral one that you can find. So if you have something like, let's go for this one. It's kind of like a, I don't know, like a canyon or something. It is pretty cool, and we can turn on shadows as well. Rotate around. So this is a pretty cool environment that I think, for displaying the character or maybe a work in progress is definitely something interesting. If you select this cave entry as well, let's rotate around. You also get a very cool lighting scenario. And if you turn on the shadows, just a simple screenshot of that would look really cool. However, the issue with this, and perhaps that's what you were asking, is that you're working on textures and you're developing a material that is also, or what you see is also influenced by the quality and the color of the light and the intensity of the light. So let's say if I'm working with this environment and then I'm kind of like judging the color of the plastic, I would say, this looks a little bit greenish and gray, so I'm gonna compensate and make it a different color. So what you're doing is compensating the true nature, the true color of your textures to match a specific environment. And as soon as you change the environment, then you'll have to recompensate again and change things around. So in this case, when you're working with textures, not just to create a nice sort of like work in progress screenshot or anything like that, what I would recommend is one called the Tomoko Studio, which this is tiny. Where are we? Where's the Tomoko Studio? Oh, maybe I don't have it here. Here it is. So this Studio Tomoko. So this one has a tiny little bit of color. If you want like something that is pure white, just go with any of these interior ones. I just think this one has a nice setup. And for the most part, it gives you like white light. So if you click on that one, you have a nice setup. And it is pretty neutral. You can find other ones that are more neutral, like these ones, for instance, that is just black and white image. So if you click on that one, it will give you just pure white as the source of light. It's just going to be pure white, which could work, but it's a bit boring. So yeah, the Tomoko Studio, it's my choice of environment when working with textures, just because it gives you a more neutral view. And I usually don't work with shadows. In fact, when I'm creating kind of like the variations of color, I rarely use the material view. I just press the C on my keyboard, and that gives me the albedo, right? So that way I can see all the variation in color. As you can see, it's pretty bright and pretty, exaggerated, but I can see all the variations, even in the blacks, right? You see there's a tiny bit of variation, some grays as well. In all the colors, there's some kind of variation as well. So when I'm working with, the colors and the hues and generating the color palette, at least blocking it out, I try to use this mode, which again, if you press the letter C on your keyboard, it's just going to cycle through the channel. So I guess it's C for channel. So you're just looking at the different channels. I'm just pressing C. So you can see the roughness channel. So all the roughness happening here. Again, lots of variation. This is the normal. This is the transparency, I think. No, this is the height. This is the ambient occlusion, the scattering. This is the normal and the height combined. So this is basically taking the height, which is how I created this, the effect of the eyes, and turning it into a normal. And again, this is the base color. If you want to go back to material, you can do it from the drop down here, or you can just press M for material, and that's it. You're back. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. All good. How do you handle height maps? I use the height to normal filter to export them combined into the final normal map. Yeah, that's the easiest way, to be honest. I rarely use the normal channel within Painter because usually the normals for me are things that would be high frequency details like scratches and things like that. So as in, I mean, I do use it a lot. I just don't paint normal like that. So if I want to do like scratches that is going to be ultimately baked into the normal map, I would work with height. And then, like you said, it will convert at the end. I don't necessarily convert it with a filter. I just do it at the export time. So, I mean, you can use this if you want. And you can do that per channel, and that's probably an easier way to do it. But yeah, it is very yeah, it's very simple to do. So just to give you an example of that. Oh, I think Alwyn just joined. Sweet. So I'm gonna create a new layer, and I'm gonna give you just a quick example of this. And I'm gonna make it a matte black color. And let's go ahead and do. Owen, I think you are on mute. So I'm gonna add a fill layer. I'm gonna mute you. There we go. So we have this fill layer that's currently just a grayscale. And if I go to the textures, I'm gonna type scratches. And let's use this grunge. I'm gonna drop it in there. So that's it. That's how easy it is to generate scratches. But obviously, if you wanna something that is a bit more realistic, like stronger scratches, you might wanna add some depth to this. So in fact, let's go ahead and let's actually just leave the roughness by itself. So there's no color information or anything, just roughness. And let's enable the height. So this is the reason why I try to work with height maps so I can visualize it. And then at the end, it's going to be combined and converted into normals. Because I can enable normal and I can paint literally on the normal, but I prefer to do it on the height so I can control this like so. So it's non-destructive, right? So right now I just have a single layer that has a mask basically, and it's giving me those very strong scratches, but then I can control the height. So let's say I put it, this is very strong, right? But I'm gonna leave it as it is, and then I'm gonna use these grunge scratches to maybe tile it, and I'm gonna reduce the balance and the quality of the scratches. Okay, tiling it a little bit more. This is kind of like the same thing as using the tile in here, really, but so you have these scratches, right? And if I go to the normal, so normal here, you won't see it, right? Because this is not normal. This is just height information, right? Hopefully you can see it. So this is the height information. But when you export it, and this is not something like I said that I do it with a filter or anything. I just don't worry about it. I just work with height just to generate the variation in the height map. And then when you export it, you can export the height plus the normal together combined, and that's when you can see these scratches as normal, right? So this is the type of thing that I would use, let's say, at render time. And I would put these type of high frequency details into the normal. And then I use something like the height map for, I would use the height as a displacement. And then I will get the displacement of the eyes, because obviously the normal is just, it's kind of like faking it. So it works really well for tiny details, but something like this, like the eyes, is just not gonna work. Or it's not gonna give you the effect that you want. So in that case, you wanna use like true displacement, what you can see here. So this is actually displacing the geometry quite a bit, like the eyes, right? Don't worry, I think all of this is covered in the training series that I did with this guy. So I'll show you how to generate all of that. And it's non-destructive as well. So I can take these eyes and I can move them around, and it's not, let me just show you that. Because it's fun. So I should have named this properly. The nose, the eyes, here we go. So here are the eyes. All right. So for this, I use a path, but basically it is a non-destructive workflow. So this is the cool thing, right? I can take this and I can just move them around. It's obviously not gonna affect the entire texturing set because I didn't use the same sort of stack of layers for everything. But if I want to change the layers of the eyes, I can just move this around, and you see it is maintaining that sort of depth around. So in that sense, is pretty cool and non-destructive. Don't worry, all of that is already covered in the training session. But anyway, so this is basically the setup of this guy. Let me know if there's other questions. Just feel free to put them in the chat as well. And in the meantime, I'm just gonna bring in a resources, or not resources, but my reference, so we can talk a little bit more about the initial process, which is probably what you guys are at the moment that are joining the challenge. All right, so I have a pure ref. Let me know if you can see it. I think I shared the entire screen, so you should be able to see this. Cool. All right, so with the pure ref, I'm sure you're familiar with PureRef. It's just a great software for collecting references and keep track of your progress. And I use it as well with taking screenshots, and I kind of like document my own process for different projects as well. But basically, I wanted to go for this character that is kind of like a fusion between it's inspired in the Day of the Dead in Mexico, but it's also infused with a little bit of that sort of more pop culture and toy plasticky thing. So I collected all of these references that I thought they were pretty cool. Even some of the toys, like this one, already has a pretty similar vibe to what I want to go for, with very bright, distinctive colors, but that sort of plastic look. So yeah, I collected all these references for like maybe the patterns and how to lay down the patterns as well for the eyes and things like that. So you see in here in the actual character, just put it here on the right hand side. Maybe I can show you some references as well. All right, so if you look at the kind of like the pattern of the eyes, I use a lot of these references to base the design on. So it has like these sort of like floral patterns that I kind of like replicated there. And it's, I try to find similarities across these designs just to make reference to this inspiration board that I created. And you see a lot of the things come with similar patterns for the eyes. So that's kind of like what I replicated there. There's also some of like these dots and kind of like ornaments, which is what I have here as well. So I try to put as much as I could in terms of reference of the visuals to this type of style. I also collected a bunch of these. Let's go into full screen here. And these are pretty cool. I think they must have a name. I just don't know the name, but because they're pretty similar. So this is the type of aesthetic that I want to go for, like the cleanness of the design. I want something very bold in terms of the colors, very defined edges, which is something that is slightly different to what I usually do. I tend to go for like more stylized but realistic textures with a lot of details and more towards the realistic sort of side. Which in this case is still trying to get to that realistic state, but is trying to get this toy plastic or vinyl toy, material. So I use these ones as my reference for the aesthetic, for the render that I want to go for. But it's just a combination of those two. So I just want to show you kind of like the reference that I have. Now on top of that, I just collected a bunch of colors that I found like really interesting. These are kind of like graphic design, some retro stuff that, this one is pretty cool actually. I think I use, base the combination of some of the colors in this one. So you'll see it in here. I mean, it's not exactly the same thing, but it is in there. So it has that sort of retro vibe. Maybe here in this pattern, you'll see it as well, right? So as you can see, it's just a lot of, resourcing into, or like finding resources that you're going to use for the aesthetic, for the colors, for the actual material. So the more reference that you gather and the clearer view that you have about what you want to achieve, the better. Hang on. There we go. So so I just collected a bunch of these really cool designs, and even though there are a bunch of different images, if you look at them as a single screenshot, let's say, of color, they're pretty similar, as in they have the same sort of contrast of color, the same sort of hue, and I feel like they have like sort of this vintage type of look, which I really like. So I use this as my reference for creating my own palette. So when I say reference to create my own palette, I doesn't mean necessarily that I go ahead and select, let's say, this one, and I choose the same colors that are in this palette. I try to use this as my reference for the proportion of colors. So for example, to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So if you look at this poster, like isolating this one on its own, you would say, like, if you squint your eyes, it's mainly green and black, right? So that is what I'm using as a reference, that if I'm going to use a green, whatever hue or green I use, in proportion to, let's say, the orange or this red color, I would use this as a reference, like, okay, this is a really good design, this is a really good composition, so I'm going to use, let's say, 90% of green with 10% of orange, and then maybe I can start reducing the percentage of the green and adding a little bit of blue, adding a bit of red. So it becomes like, a lot of back and forth, but I have this as my starting point, and I can use this to refer back to the project. Other than that, I'm just going to show you some of the process really quickly. So once I had an idea, I did a very rough sketch and just on a piece of paper, basically replicating the design of Matt. And then I just sketched this out with some ideas. Again, these are references for myself, that things that I want to keep or things that I want to add to the design. So for instance, the design here, the pattern for the eye, as you can see, it's pretty rough. And it's not a great sketch, but it gives me an idea of what to aim for. And that's something that is really good to do. Even if you don't have like maybe you don't have the 2D skills just yet. As you can see, like I said, this is very rough, but it gives me something, right? It gives me some idea of what to aim for. The same thing with the patterns, right? So you have this sort of pattern that I created here. Is not the same, like for the vest. Let me just put it here. So it's not exactly the same thing that I have here in my custom design, but I try to replicate, I try to generate something similar, right? So I don't have the same pattern, but you see, it is kind of there. Same thing with these sort of like ornaments. It's not exactly the same thing. It's obviously better refined in 3D, but it gives me an idea of what to aim for. So that's what I kind of like wanted to show you, in terms of like how to set up and prepare for a project. Even if you do like a very rough sketch like this one, and you make your own notes, like, oh, this would be kind of like a cool tileable pattern, which in fact, I'll show you. This is something that I create after, right? So I built this quick sketch, and then I went into Photoshop and created this pattern, right? And this is just a black and white image based on this idea. You see, it's not the same thing, but kind of. And I use that one to create this pattern here, this red one, right? So, and this is roughly what I wanted to place it. So you see, even though it's not the same thing, it's not like a carbon copy of the sketch, the resulting image is pretty close. So it's really good to have that sort of, sketch or thing to have it as an aim more than anything, more than a full reference, is just to have it as an aim. All right, so after that, I just went through a process of iteration. I think this one's actually, in terms of the process, these are the first things that I did before I actually went ahead and created a reference for myself. So these ones are like just testing. I did these ones without any sketch or anything like that. It was just like, a fun exercise to try out different colors and play around with the palette and, get to know, let's say, like tools like the path tool. So all of these things are done with the path tool that I do cover in the training. And then I went ahead and did something more stylized, more kind of like artsy look. So it still looks like a vinyl toy, maybe like an old vinyl toy. And this is using basically some of these images that I collected. So you see this one is pretty obvious in the eye, right? So I just literally drag and drop them on top just to get a sense. Obviously, I wasn't gonna use these ones, but it was just to get a sense of how those very colorful, bright hues would work together. And I think it's kind of cool. And then I use the filter that I showed you at the beginning of today's session with the kind of like the strokes to generate this sort of like painterly look as well. So that's pretty cool. And then again, just for fun, in fact, This is not in order. There we go. After these ones, I, play around with these ones and different types of material, just to test. And I was kind of like testing the portability of the filters that I was using. So in other words, how non-destructive the workflow that I was setting up was going to be. So using the same technique, the same asset, the same layer stack, I was able to very, very quickly convert this into this, because again, it's maintaining all the placement of the details and all of that. So it's just replacing literally materials within folders to create something completely different in terms of the vibe of the of the toy, of the vinyl toy. But anyway, after that, with the same idea of like maintaining that sort of non-destructive workflow, I came up with all of these variations of the design. In reality, the main variation is the color, but because everything is non-destructive, it was very, very easy to do. You might see like not much difference between these two. It's just actually the green turn into blue. So you could do that with the filter that I showed you, the HSL Perceptive. The only caveat with that is that if you use the HSL Perceptive, it's just going to change all the hues. So if you have a green and blue and different colors like I have here, it's going to shift all of them at the same time. So it's going to move the entire spectrum of color. Whereas with the non-destructive workflow, if I change, let's say, the layer that has the green color, I can just do very, very specific updates, and it's not going to change the entire thing. Same thing here. This is basically going back to the original, but instead of showing the plain sort of plastic, I added a paint on top, so like a paint layer with the blue. Again, just to play around with the value. So this is another one that I liked quite a bit. So I did a render, and this is done in Stager with just some of the assets that come with Stager. So I actually rendered out a couple of close-ups. And if you download the FBX format that comes with all the cameras and everything that you need to use for the render, there are some cameras, and these are cameras that come with that FBX. So it's just close-ups to the different areas. So you see, this is kind of like the final, the final texturing process, right? So I took this one and I turned it into a painting or like an artwork here for the wall. But all of these assets, the coffee cup, all of these pieces, all of these, the lamp, everything else is an asset that comes in 3D Stager. So when you get to the rendering stage, you can do a very simple scene like this just with the assets that come with 3D Stager, and dragging and dropping materials that also are available, like this wood material. All of that is part of the same. So the only thing that I did in Substance 3D Painter is the matte character, but then I extracted like a black and white image and I put it in here as kind of like the branding of the coffee cup. I use my sketch and I put it here as a, just to show, and maybe like a work in progress in the background, out of focus, this character, the same thing as here, like 3D prints or something. So it's just a fun project to do, but like if you consider all aspects of it and you spend some time building up your reference board, in fact, I would encourage you to go for a way more than what I have in here, just so that you have a very defined kind of like aim or goal to create your character, and that will help you stay on track and meet the deadline, as well as creating something that is truly powerful visually. All right, so I think that is pretty much all I had for today in terms of what I wanted to share with you guys and cover. But at the end of the day, this is more of a Q&A. So if you have any questions right now, feel free to drop them in. Otherwise, we can wrap it up. Happy to answer anything that you want. All good? All right, so I guess no questions is a good sign. Will there be a feedback session? Yeah, I think there will be. Andrew, yeah, I can show you that. I'll give you a teaser more than an intro. All right, it's loading up. So this would be the basically what the aim for lesson 2 would be. So like the next the next installment in the training, we already have our base material. So in this lesson, what I'm gonna do is cover basically how to set up the non-destructive workflow. So basically what I have here, and I'm gonna cover things like, let's say, the path. So for example, and some of the anchor points as well. So let's say let's open this one up. So the nose and the eyes. So just like I just showed you before. So these are using the path tool. So I'm going to cover all of these in this next session. So it's just a non-destructive workflow. That's basically what it is. And I'm using also anchor points to maintain the depth and the color across. So I can just make something that is larger. Let's go ahead and increase the size as well, so you can see. So I can make a larger nose. I can do the same thing for the eyes, and all of this is within the same sort of layer. So you can make something a bit larger. And you see how the color and the depth and all of that is reacting in real time. So I'm going to cover how to do that, even the teeth as well. Right, so these are all path. So you can just change these quite a bit. So the whole point of the next session really is just to play around with this non-destructive workflow. So if at any point you're already well and truly ahead in your texturing process, but you decide to change the expression or change something just to help with whatever you want to convey with your texturing workflow, this is the workflow that I cover, how to set it up, how to use the anchor points and all of that, so that it is a non-destructive workflow, and essentially blocking out your palette as well. So it doesn't look as fun yet because it doesn't have all the wear and tear and the generators and things like that, but that would come after. If you have like a solid base and you have a nice composition, let's say, or you treat the character as a composition, you have a nice balance between the colors and your the distribution of your color palette, that is going to give you a very solid start for then having fun with all the the texturing details and the generators, which we're also going to cover. So this is just purely a the setup, but it's a very interesting way of working as well. So yeah, that's going to be coming up next. Sweet. All right, guys. So I think that's it for today. One last minute question. If there is anything in the chat, I'll check. No, all good. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. And if you have more questions that you might find because you have started the process, I will make sure that you just write them down and save them. And in the next session, I'll be happy to answer them as well. All righty. No worries, guys. So I'll see you next time. Cheers. Have a good one.